Good evening and welcome to this Conscious Together stream. Thank you for joining me. It's a slightly different show than what we build, I'm afraid. We aren't able to come together as a Conscious Together team today. However, the topic that we wanted to talk about, change and mindfulness, why is change so difficult, and what can we do to make the change process more effective in our lives, is a topic that we all want to talk about. And we want to revisit this at the next session, which will hopefully be next Wednesday as normal. So we will go more fully into this topic next week. But we didn't want to leave you without the opportunity to hear some of what we're going to talk about and to take away, hopefully, some practical tips that might guide you in the meantime, give you some opportunity to reflect on change in your life and how you might take it forwards. So there you go. So with that said, we're going to just cover a little bit around why change is so difficult, why we're so resistant to it. And I'm going to invite some mindful reflection on some methods that might be useful to help you do something to counterbalance some of that tendency that we have. But before we step into that, we'll begin with a little settling practice. So just sit yourself or lie as you wish, if you wish to partake. And if you're happy to, just let the eyes gently close. If you're sitting, then sit a little taller, a posture of attentiveness, of focus. And take a gentle breath or two just to settle yourself into the present moment. And perhaps focus on the experience of the breath at the tip of the nose itself. Noticing perhaps cooler air as it comes in, warmer air as it leaves again. What is the experience of the breath right now? We don't need to change it. We don't need to slow it down. We don't need to make the breath deeper than it is. See if you notice any tendency or temptation to change the breath itself, to make it behave other than it is naturally in this moment. And just allow yourself to rest in this experience as you find it. What's the rhythm of the breath? Is it deep or shallow? Is it fast or slow? And does it feel pleasant to pay attention to this quality? Or is it challenging? Is it unpleasant? Or perhaps there isn't much distinction at all. And notice the nature of any thoughts that are present right now. Whether the mind is trying to take over, to distract, to lead somewhere else. And just note that for what it is. And as best you can, letting go of the stickiness of the mind, of thoughts. Notice them, acknowledge them, and let them be. Check in with any emotional quality that might be present. And perhaps there is no strong, overriding emotional quality in this state that you find yourself in now. And see if there's any inclination of the mind to want to feel a certain way, to want to be experiencing a specific emotion, one fit for meditation and mindfulness. And see if you can allow the experience that you find to be as it is. And finally, taking some time to check the physical experience of the body itself. Gentle scan from the toes to the head, the front and the back, within and without. Noting any areas of tension or discomfort. And equally paying attention to any areas that are comfortable and easeful. If there is discomfort, see if you can notice any urge or tendency to want to be rid of it, to push it away. And instead, if you can, gently turn towards the experience, paying careful and considered attention to the physical, felt experience. And as we come to the end of this short introductory practice, just come back to the breath itself, focusing as closely as possible on the tip of the nose. And when you're ready, gently opening the eyes, taking some time to look around, reorientate yourself in the space that you're in. Have a stretch if you wish to. Have a drink of water. Thank you. So just take a moment at the end of that practice to reflect, if you wish to, on how that felt for you, whether it felt pleasant or unpleasant, whether it was a natural feeling practice, whether there was a sense of connection with it and intuitiveness, or was it frustrating, challenging? And there's no right answer. And again, there's no answer that you need to find. There's no way that the meditation practice, the mindful practice needed to be successful. Mindfulness is developing the skill of noticing what is and accepting it, through which something interesting might arise. But the something interesting should never be the intention of the exercise. So, thank you. So change. So change is something that we invariably want to do in our lives, but equally there's a lot of pressure on us to change. Pressure from our friends, from our family, from society around us. There's a lot of pressure that can come to us through the media, through social media. People everywhere are looking to share ideas on how they feel we should best live our lives, ways that might benefit each other, ways that might benefit the planet, ways that might benefit the individual. And it's important to notice those pressures, those conflicting pressures. And one of the most important questions to ask yourself when looking to make changes in your life are whether these changes are for you, whether you are bought into them, or whether you are feeling obligated to do so for another reason. And it doesn't mean that external pressures shouldn't influence us to change. But if we're doing something motivated externally, it's often a lot harder because we don't have the same level of buy in. Now, that may be different if we have a close personal relationship or connection with the person influencing us. If a member of our family, for example, wanted us to take better care of our health because they loved us and wanted us to be around, that might be sufficient motivation for us to make the necessary steps to change. But oftentimes, if we aren't truly bought into it, if we don't feel the personal value of something, if we don't believe that we want to make the change, that we don't believe it's right for us, then right off the bat, that's going to be very difficult for us to stick to the change process when the going gets tough. And invariably it will. Because technically speaking, change is easy, right? You can choose to eat a cake or not in any given moment. Cake is an example. It's something I have a weakness for. It's consistency of the change that we struggle with. We are creatures of habit, first and foremost. We execute the same routines almost perfectly, day in, day out. If you consider what happens in the first 20, 30 minutes, 60 minutes of your everyday, it is invariably almost very similar. And the same with other chapters in your day. If you're going to work, the travel to work, the route is always the same. You're probably listening to the same radio station. You might hear a different song, perhaps, depending on the radio station, perhaps not. You will be sat in the same traffic. You will probably find yourself thinking similar patterns of thoughts. We often eat very similar foods on a given week by week basis. We go to the same places. Very little of our lives is truly spontaneous. Very little in our lives is typically different. We are creatures of habits and we feel a degree of security in that, right? We know that those patterns of behavior have kept us alive to all intents and purposes to this point in time. So there is a natural tendency to not try and change that. Don't rock the boat, right? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And all those little analogies. Our physiology is incredibly conservative in that sense, right? We have built behaviors and survival patterns and neural pathways in our mind, and it is costly to make changes to those. It takes resources, physical, biological resources to make changes, and it takes consistent application over time. If you want to learn any new skill, practicing it once isn't enough. We need to do something over and over again to cement it in our unconscious mind. So, reflecting on that process, consider why you want to make a change. Is the change coming from within you, or is there pressure from an external party? And as I say, external pressure is not necessarily inherently wrong. It might be perfectly valid, it might be very sensible. But if you don't feel personally invested in it, it'll be very difficult for you to make the change. The other thing to consider is that we are creatures of habit and we do the same things day in, day out. And if we do the same things day in, day out, we invariably won't change. Making changes to our routine, changes to the skills we want to learn is biologically costly. It takes resources for us to rebuild neural pathways, to practice new physical skills, and it takes consistency and effort to maintain, especially a new skill. And this is where I think, particularly in the mental health game, people tend to fall down. We are very tempted to read self-help books. There are literally hundreds of thousands of them. People have published lots of writings, some of which are incredibly good. However, we read them and we think we can understand them intellectually, and that is enough. But if we don't apply the practices and we don't apply them regularly, we fall back into our old routines. And you find the same thing when you go on holiday, or if you went on some sort of mental health retreat, some mindful retreat. You can change your environment. You can be in a different place. You can be focused and dedicated to something for up to 12 or 16 hours a day, and you'll feel hopefully wonderful. You will affect all these changes in this environment. But when you leave that environment and go back to your normal environment, your normal routine, invariably those patterns of behavior, those skills, those disciplines fall by the wayside, and the original habits take over and dominate our life once more. So, change is simple, but it really isn't easy. And that's where having a backup with something like mindfulness can really support us in this journey, because having that self-aware lens is so useful when we are feeling pressure to either change something that perhaps doesn't feel right for us, or to revert to our old patterns of behavior. We stand a chance of catching ourselves before the action has taken place, or a better chance of catching ourselves before the action takes place. Our mind is capable of stopping all but the most hardwired reflexes, right? We do have that time to be considerate, to be reflective on whether this is the right action to take. Mindfulness helps us create more depth to that buffer, more capacity in it. It can build us essentially more time in our mental headspace, so that we can recognize the pull of a behavior, the pressure to go back and eat a cake because we had a stressful day. And cake is a solution that we have relied on for many years to make us feel a different way about ourselves. And so we know cake works, right? It's worked time and time again for a long time. So subconsciously, we're going to use our cake, the metaphorical cake, insert any other item of security that you might wish to insert at that point, right? You know it works. Subconsciously, you know it works. You're going to go to it. And the more pressure you are under, the more the worse you feel about yourself in the given moment, because life has got on top of you, and life always gets on top of us, right? Then the more likely we are to return to default patterns, because we know they work in the short term. We appreciate that they don't work in the long term, because otherwise we wouldn't look to change those practices, right? If cake made you feel better in the moment and was good for your waistline and improved your cardiovascular fitness and made you stronger, we'd all be eating cake all the time. There'd be no need to change it. But invariably, these behaviors that we want to change, these habits we want to change, they work in the short term, but they are not optimal for us in the long term. And it's that conflict that mindfulness can help us be more aware of, be more present with, so that we stand a better chance of making a discerning judgment and affording us the opportunity to take a different path, thus reinforcing our positive behavior rather than falling off the wagon. So, there you have it. So, this is really just a toe in the ocean of the topic that we will be covering more next time as a group together. All right. So that you'll hear from Oliver and you'll hear from Avanti and you'll hear from me and all our perspectives on change, mindfulness for change, and how we can be more effective in making changes that we want to make in our life. But hopefully, this brief session has given you something to reflect on, something for you to work with. And I hope that you will join us next time. So, questions, comments, as always, down below. Please like, subscribe, share, click the notification bell, all that good stuff. Help us build this community, be part of this community. Let us know what you would like us to cover and what aspects of your life you would like us to consider through a mindful lens. So there you have it. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.